Mortgage Classic has always been about more than just golf. It's been about our ability to highlight and impact the city of Detroit.
Currently, Detroit sits as one of the least connected cities in America. You have a lot of residents here who don't have internet access or high-speed internet access at that. So my role as a Director of Digital Inclusion for the city of Detroit is really building an ecosystem on how do we bridge the digital divide. And so we place an emphasis on internet access, devices, and tech support for residents who need it the most.
We're really proud of the progress we've made through changing the course. We've already been able to launch Connect 313, an organization focused on bridging the digital divide. And through Connect 313, we've been able to distribute over 10,000 tablets to seniors across our community, alongside some healthcare resources and data plans that will support connectivity.
So over the next few years, thanks to changing the course, our focus on the digital divide is going to change drastically. Right now, while we might be talking about getting residents internet access today, that's not going to be our fight tomorrow. And so I think when looking at the future, it's really us articulating that longer vision, that bolder vision of what a connected Detroit looks like for all of us.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us today, Josh. Each city, town, and county has its share of factors that contribute to the digital divide present among its residents. Leaders and advocates in Detroit recognize that addressing the digital divide would require commitment from both the public and private sectors. Joshua Edmonds, Director of Digital Inclusion for the City of Detroit, joins us today to discuss how stakeholders are cultivating public-private partnerships to tackle the city's digital divide head-on. In his role, Edmonds is responsible for creating a sustainable digital inclusion strategy to help bridge Detroit's very vast digital divide. His work intersects with public policy, telecommunications, and community engagement. Thanks again for joining us today. And what we saw in that video is definitely a strong example of partnerships between both public and private entities. Could you tell us a little bit more about that partnership with Rocket Mortgage?
Absolutely, and definitely strong thanks to Next Century Cities, especially Francello Chillo. Any time to engage here is an honor. But in that video, yeah, it exemplifies a facet of our partnership. So the Rocket Mortgage Classic, it's part of the PGA Golf Tour. Every single golf tournament, hint, hint, for all you communities watching, every single golf tournament, actually, the proceeds do go to nonprofits. And so just keep that in mind, that's what we're doing with one aspect of our partnership that has been birthed out of what we refer to as changing the course. So changing the course of the digital divide in Detroit has been birthed out of this larger golf classic. And so Connect 313, the founding members are Microsoft, United Way for Southeast Michigan, the Rocket Community Fund, as well as the city of Detroit. So that golf tournament, again, is an aspect of this larger shared understanding around this digital divide and honoring work that others have done, while also at the same time looking for any opportunity to partner where there are resources.
Thank you for that background information. I know you mentioned Connect 313, and I'll touch on that in a few minutes. But I do have a question. What advice do you have for other municipalities that are seeking to forge partnerships with public and private entities to help address the digital divide present among their residents?
So, I have a lot. I'm gonna do my best to be like segmented in it. But I think oftentimes when I'm seeing communities look at Detroit, and they'll say, well, we don't have X entity here. Well, we don't have, our private sector is not as strong as that, and blah, blah, blah. Okay. I'll let you all know that prior to 2019, you didn't really see the private sector leaning in on the digital divide. You had the Knight Foundation, philanthropically, they were leaning in, but again, you didn't really see this larger movement around lifting up this work. What we've been able to accomplish comes from us being very bold in the way that we've been operating and being laser focused on objectives while at the same time honoring the way that people work. This was a conversation where, and I've told local communities this before, if you have a $50 million problem, then you have a $50 million problem. And that's what you tell these folks. Don't go up there, trying to be scarcity minded. And full disclosure, I realize a lot of our communities, we are scarcity minded. That's what happens when you're working here. And so this is something where I think the initial advice is to be very bold, but at the same time to be very knowledgeable about your partnership structure. If you have certain private entities and private groups who are only going to fund one side of this or only going to do this or that, knowing that and honoring that. General Motors is another entity that has been a huge supporter of our work. General Motors is a huge supporter of our work because they have an emphasis on electric vehicles. So therefore, and when we're engaging with them, we're aware of that. We're reading their annual reports. We know where they're going. We know that Chase Bank has a real strong emphasis on lifting up Black and brown communities. That's a national commitment that they've made. So therefore, us being aware of their annual reports and knowing their words, knowing the direction of their leadership, and being able to carve out how digital equity makes sense, that's different than what I oftentimes see, which is the general, hey, this is what we're doing. We could really use help fundraising. No. These people on the ground are trying to accomplish their national objectives. So therefore, knowing their national objectives, sometimes better than them, that protects us and it protects them and allows them to get the convey the investment confidence they need to be able to work at the local level in a more effective capacity. So those are the two. I believe there's another one, but I'll just stop talking. I know there's other questions.
Oh, no, that's completely fine. If it comes to mind, just let us know, okay? But that's really good advice for leaders and communities of all sizes that are seeking to forge these partnerships. Detroiters like yourself are committed to closing the city's digital divide. In 2020, we saw the development of Connect 313. Could you tell us a little bit more about how that came to fruition, the goals of Connect 313, the partnerships involved, and how it continues to work to meet Detroit's needs digitally?
Yeah, so 2020 was definitely a very interesting year. And I'll tell you what happened March, I believe it was March 8th, whatever the first Friday, full Friday week was in March, that's when we had a convening. Obviously, in retrospect, we realized that, COVID was a thing in March, but it wasn't, until like the second week in March when it really took off. The reason why I'm highlighting that is because during that March meeting, we had about 45 different organizations in the room. Again, this is making me shudder because of COVID, but we had that many folks in the room. And we had talked about this digital divide in a way of saying, like, look, this is a citywide issue. Yes, neighborhoods need to be at the forefront. Yes, community groups need to be at the forefront. But at the end of the day, this is a citywide issue. So at that table was every internet provider in Detroit, commercial and private. And in addition to our internet providers, we had a litany of community groups, folks just representing different populations in the city, as well as big tech, everybody. And at that table, we kind of said, look, it behooves us not to figure this out. We need to do this for Detroiters, for our future, for whatever we're working on. There's no way that we're going to be as effective if we don't bridge this digital divide. It touches all of us. Literally, in a prophetic sense, the next week, the city shut down. And I think that that's something where, again, we weren't planning that to happen. We weren't trying to be dramatic there, but that then us shutting down prior to that, that allows us to say, we weren't doing our things in response to the pandemic. We were doing things in response to this is the right thing to do. And so as we began moving forward throughout the year, we continued meeting obviously virtually and strategizing on how do we actually coordinate our ecosystem. You can look across this country. I'm not going to name the cities because it's going to seem like I'm doing an indictment on them, but there are a number of cities who have digital inclusion alliances. And that's cool. I'm glad that people have a heart and I'm glad that they can convene around a topic. That's fine. But what is the structure? What is the coordination that's actually going to allow us to bridge this digital divide? And it's not just stopping at our anchor institutions we see in our community. It's not just stopping at our library, our public housing entities. It's going beyond that. And so what we said is like, hey, how do we coordinate this in a way that can convey further investment confidence from the federal government, from private stakeholders across the board? So that's how we established that Connect 313 fund, which the Rocket Mortgage Classic being, Connect 313 being a beneficiary of that helps. But in addition, what didn't get mentioned, later on in December, we also did Connecting Seniors, which was about $4 million we got from the state to do telehealth for seniors. Those are things like us building and operating and coordinating allows us to look at every single federal and restrictive and state grant that comes up. We now have a body that is able to essentially collect that funding and then distribute it accordingly within our larger ecosystem. So that way we don't have to be thinking in a scarcity way. We're thinking in an operationalized way that is built towards action.
And you touched on this, that you all had community groups that you work with to reach the community. Could you talk a little bit more about how you all go about making sure that community perspective is at the center of what you do?
Yeah, so there's so many different ways to look at it, but it all starts with our values. So I'm not going to, go through all of our values, but I'm going to say two of them. Two of them that we say, and quite frankly, that community says back to us anytime there's a perception of deviation from those values. So we say locally led, expertly informed. We're not going to be paying experts to give opinions for what we already know to be true here. I'm not going all the way around the country to have someone tell me something that I already know to be true because my neighbor's telling me this stuff. We are to align and empower local leadership while at the same time seeking expert counsel. In addition to that, we progress at the speed of trust. We say that here all the time. And I think that that's the missing ingredient whenever anyone's trying to do this community work. There are people who are to this day skeptical of what we do. And I welcome that skepticism. I think they should be skeptical. I think you should be skeptical of anything that the government's doing. And so we're not shying away from that. And I think that by us being transparent in that, I think that's been able to allow us to bridge some of those trust gaps. Because I think that oftentimes whenever we do need to reach those residents or knock on those doors, I mean, we built a community ambassador structure to be able to do door knocking. We built that. And we're also looking at empowering folks who are already knocking on doors. So that way we don't have to duplicate efforts. Because I've had 6 different people knock on doors and I'm like, why isn't it just one person giving me 6 pieces of information? And so like we're cognizant of that. But again, us building out this larger structure around trust is first building the trust with these organizations. And then when that gap is built, then it's building trust with those organizations to the community. And so we're not necessarily shying away from nuance. We just realize the manifestation of the digital divide isn't just a subsidy thing or isn't just an internet access thing. It is a profound lack of trust that has been exacerbated by people who have been left on the wrong side of the digital divide for far too long. And so I think that us just being very cognizant of that and showcasing to our community partners that we're aware of that and we respect who they are, I think that has allowed us to be able to bridge those gaps. We're not perfect. We have blind spots. A lot of our work has been formulated through the pandemic. So our outreach needs to transform much more. But at the end of the day, our structure that we're building, we're doing it in an additive way, and we're advancing and we're evolving as we go.
And how has what you've learned from other municipalities helped inform your partnership development strategies in Detroit?
Well, I would say that a lot of this learning has been internal. I'm not saying that we're not learning from other municipalities. I think we see things. I think we're aware of what other municipalities are doing. But I think that a lot of our answers are already here in Detroit. We already have residents who are saying, we don't trust this provider, or this provider is doing this or that, or you all don't engage, or we never see you in the community. A lot of those things, I mean, I would say, namely, most large cities are going to have those concerns from residents expressing that. And so I don't really think that whenever I'm looking at other communities, I'm not looking at communities to learn from them. I'm looking at communities to say, let's band together for standardization. Let's band together for standardization of data collection. So that way we can pull that as a policy lever. Let's band together for shared lessons and shared learning and collecting anecdotal feedback that, again, can be used as a policy lever. So, I mean, I could be a bit flawed in this, but whenever I'm looking at other communities across this country, I'm very rarely looking at them from a best practice standpoint. And I'm more looking at them from a standpoint of, if we link arms, we could do some damage, which kind of cosigns, the eccentric cities in a way. So, soft plug there. But again, locally, I believe most of us communities are very profoundly aware of what needs to happen and how it needs to happen. I think a lot of this historically has came from the lack of funding that's made it, a little bit more difficult. But since we have a little bit more funding and since there's a little bit more bass in my voice because we have that funding, a lot of our efforts now have been, again, very rooted in a hyperlocal fashion of what is our community saying specifically to us. Not whatever they're saying in Houston, not whatever they're saying in Los Angeles. I'm sure they're saying the same thing. In fact, I know they're saying the same thing. But at the end of the day, we are very laser focused on being responsive to our community and gleaning the lessons learned that have already been articulated through various studies and various feedback sessions.
And I know you mentioned, obviously, not just Detroit, but everyone, COVID definitely heavily impacted what the digital landscape looked like for us worldwide. Taking into consideration the work that y'all have been able to do over the past year and looking ahead, what is the future of, digital connectivity look like for Detroit?
Well,
goals y'all have?
I would say, there are some things that are frustrating, and I don't pull punches on these whatsoever. I would say that since my tenure in the city, we're going on about 3 years now, the state has to step up way more. And so as I'm looking at other communities, I mean, Ohio is doing a heck of a job when it comes to emergency broadband benefit enrollment. You all can see that. Illinois is leaning in huge. Virginia just announced, what, $700 million for broadband? Maryland's been doing a great job communicating. I mean, North Carolina's broadband office is great. And I'm saying all these things because locally, we have figured it out enough. We're not perfect. Again, we're going to keep evolving. We're going to keep finding our blind spots. But I'm literally looking at the state. Our state just didn't just create a broadband office. Our state created the Office of High-Speed Internet. They were very intentional with that name. And they want to empower every single local community with that. And so what does that mean for Detroit? Well, that means that our work is going to change with the creation of that, because I'm expecting expert coordination and additional resource allocation that then complements our approach already. Now, I had said in that earlier video that I don't believe our digital divide fight is going to look the same as it's looked these past couple of years. I think we're connecting people at a very high rate. We're leveraging the emergency broadband benefit. We're being very creative. We recently received $45 million for ARPA funding alone. A lot of other communities are only doing 5 to 10. We're doing 45. And so with that level of funding, matching with our private sector investments that we know are also in tow, matching that with our state, I think a lot of our focus is now going to be shifting to digital empowerment. So digital inclusion is, I think, step one, getting people just connected, getting them connected to a device, getting them connected to internet access, doing some basic digital literacy training. Digital empowerment is where we're looking. Now that people are connected, now what? And I can't stand, and I pray that we're never in that scenario where someone has to say, now what to us? I think we need to clearly define and say, these next couple of years, we're changing the tides. I know we were saying over here, and we did that. Now we're over here. And as we're over here, that is now where we're changing Detroiters from being content consumers and content producers, changing people from being underemployed. And I don't believe there's such thing as overemployed. So whatever the safe word is for not underemployed, I really think that we're going to get into longitudinal outcomes off of digital inclusion, which in our mind reads as digital empowerment.
And I know you mentioned earlier, developing trust among residents is a huge thing. And I want to know, so a lot of times I find that residents could be skeptical, especially when you start working with larger partners. How do you work to foster that trust with them to help them know that these partnerships are for their good?
So recently, we actually facilitated, I shouldn't say recently, I mean, whatever, recent is subjective, but last December, we facilitated a community election for Connect 313. And in order to vote, you had to be a member of Connect 313, which to be a member of Connect 313 in our community council, you have to live in Detroit, we have to work in Detroit, or you have to learn in Detroit. And so therefore, the voting then allowed residents to raise their hand and say, hey, we have 5 committees: devices and connectivity, digital literacy and skilling, policy advocacy and ecosystem, special projects and shared resources, and structure and operation. Within those 5 committees, we're paying those committees. So we're paying the actual committee leaders to legitimately make recommendations to expand our thinking. And so I think that when you're looking at how do you get residents involved, well, I think it's treating residents with the dignity that they deserve. I think so many times we have these conversations around the digital divide and we look at residents in this deficient viewpoint. And I think that we're oftentimes looking at their scenario and where they happen to be in life, whether it's economic or whatever, negative thing that we want to attach to it, and say, because you're this, you don't have the ability to think outside the box, or you couldn't possibly expand our thinking. And that's not the case. And so I think that what we've been able to demonstrate and how we've been able to foster that trust is by being very transparent and say, you all have answers that we don't have. You all have lived experiences that we don't have. So therefore, the way that you're going to craft interventions are better than what we're going to craft. I have a devices and connectivity committee right now that is talking about creating a Detroit internet standard. What is a standard for internet service? What is a high-speed standard for internet service for Detroit? I don't care that 25.3 is what the FCC is saying. I'm saying what's in Detroit. I'm not coming up with that recommendation. Residents are. So then what am I doing? I am supporting my community. So if anyone asks who came up with that, the community did, and I am supporting that. And so I think that level of respect and transparency and trust, that is an iterative an evolving process that we are sticking to, and we believe that our community has the answers that we need to bridge the digital divide.
And we have some people in the chat agreeing with you. Treating residents with dignity and respect definitely should be at the forefront of all the work that you do. And as we close out this conversation today, I want to thank you again for your time. But what do you want people to know about your work that maybe you haven't mentioned, and just everything as it relates to continuing your work going forward?
Well, I think that I would like people to know that at this point, we are looking at sharing as much lessons learned as possible. We are in the process of communicating to a larger body that I'm not going to name around working together with municipal decision makers. I think that there are a lot of people who are doing this work, especially with ARPA money that's coming in, especially with the emphasis and need for data. There needs to be a standardized conversation across the board. For anyone on this call, for all the cities who are working together, we have to get standardized. Data is going to be our best policy lever to pull. We need to be longitudinally minded. We cannot stop at the American Community Survey. I know you all know this, but we cannot stop there. We cannot stop at definitions around digital inclusion and methodology that existed before the pandemic. If our thinking has not transformed because of the pandemic, I think we're doing our jobs wrong. And so at this point, the thing that I would like to let everyone know is that in Detroit, and I'm talking to some of these other cities too, we need to be collaboratively minded, and we need to standardize what we're doing. That is going to be the greatest policy lever for us to be able to sustain this work moving forward. And we're not going to look at this large sum of money now and get seduced by complacency. We cannot do that. I am urging every community, can we please work together and pull these policy levers in a way that is standardized and that is going to empower not only Congress to free up funding, but as well as these local communities to get this work done in a more sustainable way.
Well, thank you so much, Josh. It's always good to have you here with NCC, and we appreciate your support, and we're always supporting Detroit. We want to encourage you all to make sure you learn more about Connect 313 and what's happening in Detroit. We will share information via our social channels. Up next, we do have a session specifically looking at COVID, what we must do to inform universal broadband strategies.